Welcome to the On-Premise IT Podcast, the only podcast that dares to be both on topic and on location. My name is Tom Hollingsworth, and I'm a part of Gestalt IT, and each episode we bring you the perspectives and opinions of a group of IT luminaries, experts in their field. I'd like to take a moment for our panel to introduce themselves before we jump into the topic or the premise for today's episode, starting with Avril.
Hi, my name's Avril Salter, and I'm an independent consultant. I've been working in the wireless industry for many years, over 20 years, I think it is. So welcome.
Hi, my name is Mario Gingras. I'm currently a wireless network analyst at a large financial company back up here in Canada. I'm in the networking industry for the last 25 years now, I guess.
Hi, I'm Sam Clements. I've been in the wireless industry for a little over 20 years, and I guess currently unemployed, right? Currently independent consultant. That's what they call it.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining us for this episode. Let's jump into the premise. You've probably heard a lot of talk about some of the hot new Wi-Fi topics. No. I'm not talking about Wi-Fi 7. That's a different podcast. This is talking about Wi-Fi 6E. Well, what is 6E? Well, it's that 6 gigahertz spectrum. It's going to require new radios. It's going to require new hardware. It's coming. We keep getting told that it's going to be here any day now. However, we worry about all of the technology that went into making it, all of the compromises that had to happen in order to get this pushed out the door ahead of Wi-Fi 7 so that people weren't just going to be waiting for the next revision because, I don't really care one way or the other. So the premise of this episode is that we gave up too much to get Wi-Fi 6E. Now, this topic actually comes to us courtesy of one of our friends, Jake Snyder. He was talking about this a little bit. And one of the things he talked about was the fact that it seems like part of the process was a little bit rushed. Like it felt like that they were kind of compromising some of the research on things like, does it overlap with existing infrastructure that could possibly get in the way? Did we make too many of the things in the standard optional? We're kind of wondering out loud here, how does something like this happen? Do we have to give up on these standards so that we can get buy-in, or should we just say this is the way things have to be, and if you don't like it, get on board?
I mean, I'll get that kicked off for sure. I think I think as with a lot of things, it starts with it starts with an idea, but then ends in compromise, right? And I think that's ultimately probably where he's headed there, which is there is a lot that we do give up in 6 gigahertz. There's just a lot of concessions that we have to make in order to just even have the privilege of being able to function in there. And there is a lot that we gave up, but I like to think that we gave it up conscientiously. Like there's a lot of different ways we could have done incumbent mitigation, which we do that in 5 gigahertz today through DFS. And I think the point is that we gave DFS a crack as an example, right? And I don't think everybody likes the way it works today. And so why can't we do something a little bit better? And is there a way that we can all agree that, well, yeah, maybe it takes a little bit of time to get there. I think the functional product, especially around regulatory management, especially around incumbents, is going to be far better off than what we have in 5 gigahertz today. At least in that one particular regard, right? And that tends to be the piece I think that's holding up a lot of folks here.
Yeah, I would agree with Sam on those points. I think the thing is that the industry has been growing so very, very quickly in terms of demand for Wi-Fi, demand for data. And if we didn't open up the band when we did, we were running out of spectrum. We weren't able to perhaps go forward as quickly as we wanted to and to satisfy that market demand. So I think it was really important to open up the 6 gigahertz as quickly as possible. And I also think that down the road, new technologies will come out, improved antenna technologies, etc., which will start to perhaps address some of the concerns as well. So I think opening it up early was the right thing to do. And then looking for newer technologies going forward and meeting the demand and letting the industry grow becomes the dominant factors.
I find it interesting when we start talking about, expanded use cases and business justification for adopting 6 gigahertz and the like. I don't know that I've heard a single business use case today that requires 6 gigahertz that couldn't be done in 5 gigahertz. And so while I agree that it's awesome to have the spectrum open, I agree it's awesome to have all this great, wonderful room to play in. I don't know if there's a single application today that couldn't be done in 5 gigahertz. Yeah, you might have to take some planning, but really isn't that all they've done in 6 gigahertz is a bunch of pre-planning for us, especially around things like channel width and the like. They've just taken something that we've cobbled together for a decade, trying to muddy our way through spectrum management in 5 gigahertz, especially around channel widths and DFS and the like, and they just put a plan on it. And so, yeah, I can see that it is awesome, but I've never heard of a single thing that we can't do in 5 gigahertz today.
I think the demand for data, wireless data, is the underlying. It's not like one silver bullet application, but the demand is going like this. And so if you don't have enough spectrum to meet that demand, then, and that's really what I was referring to, it's just the significant growth of data, not a silver bullet application.
Personally, I think that the fact that with 6E, you drop all the backward compatibility, will be the biggest winner, because for every new standard they introduce, they always say, oh, this will be the holy grail of Wi-Fi. But we still have, oh, you know what? We might still have that old 802.11b scanner, what have you, that is there and will kill all your spectrum. Look at even today, we have deployment, we have vast majority of 802.11ax, but you know what? I have a small Apple Watch, and that thing is 802.11n, one spatial train. So when that thing talk, it's everyone around. I think that's the biggest thing about 6E is the no backward compatibility. But it comes with a cost in terms of configuration, in terms of planning, and all those nice things that used to work that may not work. Like roaming might be challenging, especially if you move from 6 to 5 or 5 to 6.
So a question that I have kind of around that same thing was I heard a lot of chatter from friends of mine in the wireless industry about how modern devices, were falling behind because they didn't have 6E radios in them. I'm specifically talking about Apple's MacBook, Apple's iPad, Apple's iPhone. The iPhone is completely outdated because it only has a 6 radio. It doesn't have 6E like the iPad or the MacBook or some of the Android phones that have been put out. But Sam, what you said and kind of what everybody else said is, you don't need that because you have enough bandwidth from the devices that you're using. And Mario, kind of to your point, even in a MacBook or an iPad, from what I've understood, even getting the 6 gigahertz radio to connect requires you to connect on the 5 gigahertz radio to create to connect some of the handshake stuff. So in a way, we still have to support all of these other devices. So why is it that people have this idea that you have to be running the latest technology? By that same token, I could say that every handset is completely outdated now because it doesn't have a Wi-Fi 7 radio in it, because I've seen a Wi-Fi 7 access point. Granted, it's not in the wild and it's a consumer grade device, but I mean, where does the elevator stop? I guess would be a good way to put it.
It doesn't. it never will, and really, I think you really hit the nail square on the head there, Tom. Which is, these use cases, as Avril said, right? It's about servicing the data demand, not necessarily a specific thing that you're trying to do. And these devices are all about being able to connect anywhere and do the best they can with the resources they have. Like I get it. That's why we have CBRS support in the iPhone, despite the fact that it's clearly not taking like we expected it would. And so we see some of these things, and I hope that we're not going to get to a point where we see manufacturers start dropping some of these other technologies like CBRS in favor for things like 6 gigahertz. We know they have to make choices. We know they have to make choices from thermal envelope, from COGS perspective, from just resources in the devices. And at some point they're going to go, okay, cool. What's going to pay off more? Something like having CBRS or something like 6 gigahertz. And I think it's just going to in turn fragment the industry more, because you're going to get those Android manufacturers who go, well, I'm going to leave this out in order to grab this. And you just end up with inconsistent technology adoption across devices. It's going to be a really long time before we see 6 gigahertz pervasively available.
If I may, CBRS is great in the US. I'm not sure about if it's open in Europe. it's sure not still not. Yeah. Yeah, well, even because if you talk about CBRS, the problem is this is great for US, it doesn't work. I think that 6E will probably have more traction because more and more countries are opening the spectrum. In fact, EMEA opened it, most of them. We curiously, it used to be Industry Canada. Now I think it's I said something like that. They had just more letter to the regulation. What is it? The regulation. It's not company organization. Sorry, that they went quickly and they opened it. They opened it the whole spectrum, which is great for us. And even though, Apple was never very quick to adopt new speed. Remember when they released the first, I think when they moved to LTE, they were not the first one there because energy consumption and what they have in their so thing will come. It's kind of like, fill a dream, build it, and people will come. I think this is where we are going to. The challenge is always what comes first, the chicken or the hen. And at my previous employer, I was always afraid of saying, you know what, I'll have that, very important person that will buy the latest and greatest Android or what have you device that will support 6E and will come to me and say, hey, you know what, why am I not getting that great speed? Because, hey, you know what, your infrastructure is not up to date. So it's a give and take.
So I was going to make two comments to Tom's question. First is that I don't think there's a wireless technology that I've come across that you always have that challenge of, are the clients going to be there, or is the access point or the base station going to be first? And sometimes even the Wi-Fi, be it cellular, be it any wireless technology, sometimes we see the base stations going first and the clients lagging, and sometimes we see the clients driving it and the base station access points lagging. But we've always had that wrestle. So I think we might have it today, but it will go. Just like, if history is going to tell us anything, that struggle will go. We will see both eventually. The other point I was going to make was, you can never have enough spectrum, right? It's just what it is. There's always going to be demand for spectrum. There's always going to be technology that will be evolved into that spectrum. So it will happen. I think Sam's point is really interesting, because when we look at the 6 gigahertz, because of the regulations, the radio is quite different. And so it does take a time to actually build that and invest that. At the same time, we have an interesting kind of quandary because in the 6 gigahertz, we didn't need backward compatibility, but we've kept many of the features and capabilities of how Wi-Fi works the same, which does potentially make it a little bit quicker to enter the market, but at the same time was a lost opportunity. And we could have done things very differently in the Wi-Fi standards, but there would have been a delay to the market. And I don't know quite which way is best, but I do think that there was a lost opportunity in the Wi-Fi space not to have been, look, do we want to do things fundamentally different? In terms of things like scheduling functions and some of those things.
No doubt about it. I think that that we're perpetuating the backwards compatibility problem, which is we sort of drew a line in the sand and we said, hey, this, from this point forward is all new with the 6 gigahertz adoption, but what's that going to look like in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? We're going to be looking back going, man, you remember that 6E stuff that we have to stay compatible with now? Shoot, we messed that all up. And you're 100% correct. We just now reset the backwards compatibility problem and we defer it for another couple decades. That's awesome, but what about my kids?
I'll actually add one more wrinkle in there, Avril, because I know for a fact that the ultimate goal of a standards body is to produce something that is, basically it's a compromise, which means nobody is happy. The only time that standards bodies are able to vehemently agree on something is when there is a bad guy in the room that they can all unite against. And the three examples that I can give you of that are 802.1q, 802.3 AF, power over Ethernet, or I'm sorry, AT, and Trill. In 2 of those cases, literally the entire industry united to do the opposite of what Cisco wanted. And in the 3rd case, I have it on good authority that at least 4 people in the Trill working group literally united to not do what Radia Perlman wanted. So in a way, we don't get standards unless nobody is happy or everybody is literally bullying somebody out of the room. So could we have done it a little bit better? Yes. Would it have taken forever to do? Probably. We might have even gotten a 6E. It probably would have been like, a 6 update 2 or just rolled forward into 7. But ultimately, what happened was, quite honestly, there were too many people that had their own little way of wanting things to be done, and there was no enemy to unite against. So did that create enough tension in the industry where they just said, well, fine, we'll make everything optional. You don't have to agree to any of it, and we don't care as long as we can get this thing pushed out the window because we've already printed the Wi-Fi 6E stickers that we want to hand out, and we got to have something.
You bring up a really interesting point. I sometimes think that the reason why everything in the standard is optional is because if you can't get anybody to agree, you just make lots of options in there, and you can go this way or that way. And I'm not saying it's happening now, but years ago when I actually wasn't independent and actually worked for a company, a couple of us as the big companies would actually get together behind the scenes and agree what we were actually going to implement, and we would narrow down those options considerably, and then we force it into the market. That was the days when big players dominated a little bit more than they do today. And I don't know, and I don't have any insights whether it's happening today. But I think you're absolutely right there, Tom, is options get it out the door and get the standard done. And then the big players can work behind the scenes to work out what features actually roll out when and get consistency between them.
So along those same lines, we're not talking about standards bodies right now. We're talking about regulatory bodies, because the last time I checked, I can hang a Wi-Fi 6E access point in my house as long as it has integrated Omni antennas and the power levels are dialed back. As soon as I try to hang that thing outdoors, I'm going to get in trouble. If I can't even connect an external antenna to it because there's no place to plug the antennas in. We're dealing not only with a standards body that finally has agreed to disagree on everything, but we're dealing with a regulatory body who is taking their time, as government agencies do, to make sure that there are no problems. Meanwhile, we did find a bad guy. It's the incumbents who owned the 6 gigahertz spectrum before it was opened up, coming in, banging pots and pans everywhere, claiming that there's too much interference for their mission critical operations. And if you do this, then you're going to destroy us and all this other stuff. And the FCC is trying to balance both sides. Well, you've got the Wi-Fi people on one side clamoring to open this up so they can use it for point-to-point bridges or whatever. And the incumbents on the other side claiming that airplanes are going to start falling out of the sky if we let people broadcast outdoors. So how can we work with the regulatory bodies to ensure that we can fully implement the standard as written, while at the same time understanding the pressure that they're under by, quite honestly, the people lobbying them?
We could take a page out of politics and just out extreme them. We just be more atrocious and more, well, if you don't turn it on, then the planes are going to start falling from the sky, or the moon's going to fall, right? Yeah. No, that sometimes it's hard to argue with those sort of illogical responses, but yeah, unfortunately, because they were there first, they do have first rights, and I think the FCC in that regard has done a good fashion. I think that AFC management, especially around incumbents, is probably better than DFS.
And as a note there, I was actually talking with Stuart Strickland a couple of weeks ago during Aruba Atmosphere, because we were having this discussion about, well, how often should the access point check in with the AFS database in order to make sure that it's not stomping all over someone's spectrum. And my argument to some of the people there was, how often does the spectrum change that it needs to check in super frequently? And Stuart was like, yeah, we managed to talk them down from a day, because we thought maybe once every week or month would be sufficient, and they wanted it either every hour or constantly connected just in case, and there's no way that we would be able to do that. And I'm like, it's kind of funny when we look at something going a day is reasonable, and other people are like, it has to be connected at all times or there's no way we'll use it, when we know for a fact some of those radio frequencies haven't changed for years.
Yeah. That is pretty atrocious. You're right, and I think that as we look at those things that do drive channel changes, and we do look at this very, very reasonably, your big changes come from when your facility moves, right, or when you move a rack or when you move a thing. But yeah, by and large, I'd expect those things to be pretty static. Yeah, you're gonna have some churn here and there, but I would expect those to be far less than checking them once a day. But I think that's probably where they're going to end up.
Yeah. I also think, the FCC has dealt with these issues in other spectrum for years. I mean, it's not that long ago. Well, actually, it probably is a while ago, when they were looking at the pulse spectrum, right? And the ultra wideband, and all the cellular guys were getting upset and saying, oh my God, it's going to destroy our cellular networks, and 911 calls are not going to be able to be made. And, so I think we have to have trust in the process. Let them argue it out, let the tests be done, and look at technologies that can avoid these techniques. But we've been here so many times in the past years that this is just a process we have to follow. And yeah, there's going to be a lot of noise and a lot of discussions, but I'm very confident we're going to get there in the end, and the 6 gigahertz band will be usable inside and outside.
The one thing we do get, as you said, we've been here before. I think the one thing that makes this different is the fact that once we start doing AFC check-ins, we'll be able to go back and look at that data. Think about it, where you're running an AFC service for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. What are you going to be able to do to go back and look at that data from an analytics perspective and go, okay, cool, we had all these check-ins at one day, and we had these services checked in for years and years and years and years, and they got a whopping 2 changes. There will be an opportunity at some point in the future to go back and revisit these things now that we have a systems in place to go watch and log these changes. Hopefully, at least that's what the goal is, right? Let's go back and look at these from an analytics perspective after the fact, and get it cleaned up so that we can move to a week or a month, right? That should be far more reasonable.
So one other thought that I had, kind of talking about Avril's suggestion that we've been here before and we trust in the process, and the technology will win out, but we're not just fighting technology. We're dealing with marketing. And one of the things that has come up is the fact that, we had 6, this is 6E or 6R2, depending on which version you're using, but 7 is right around the corner. So in a perfect world, the amount of time that we have between the implementation of these new revisions before 802.11be comes out, we'd have enough time to sort everything out. But what we're really faced with is customers who don't want to upgrade the access points they've got because there's something kind of new on the horizon, and they'll wait for that. So now you have vendors who are using all manner of fun things to get people to want to buy those access points, even if they know they're not ready yet. I've talked to a number of companies who are like, yeah, you can buy our access point. It's Wi-Fi 6E ready. Like, what does ready mean? They're like, as soon as we're allowed to turn the things on, it'll be ready to go, but we don't know when that is. And all I'm thinking of is the draft-in APs that, we had to go rip radios out of them, or the clamshells that we had to tear apart and put new parts in because, well, it turns out that the thing we sold you wasn't really the thing that actually was going to get, ratified. So that means none of your new laptops are going to work with the old access point, and we're going to have to figure out how to get you to pay a fee to upgrade those or something like that. And again, it goes back to what Avril said. We've been here before. And how do we prevent that from happening? How can we hold off the marketing people and the sales people long enough to let the technology sort itself out?
Well, what did they do on IPv6? Because that's been a smashing success, right?
Hey, whoa. We're not bringing up 25-year-old technology here, Mr. Clements.
You said the technology will win out. That's all I'm saying.
If I can add, just stop paying the salesman and marketing by the amount of money they bring back to the company. That's basically, yeah, I know you're laughing, but that's basically it. Okay, I have a new gizmo that I need to sell, so I have to make it great every year, and that's capitalism at its best, and that's okay. That's a system that works. But at the end of the day, is have that access point that, let's say, do Wi-Fi 6, is sure that name your vendor will come up with that new gizmo that do Wi-Fi 6E or 7 or what Wi-Fi 99 and nobody knows how many years, and they will want you to buy the greatest and the best and greatest technology, the latest one, even though it's not really, even though you don't need it, because hey, they got to make their numbers at the end of the day and please the investors. So
I will say that given the choice of the two things we just discussed, it's more likely that IPv6 will actually be implemented in reality in large numbers than it will be to convince the salespeople to not get paid on the products.
I agree on that.
Right. I was going to say what they should have done is made IPv6 mandatory for 6 gigahertz or Wi-Fi 6E. That would have made you happy.
Well, I mean, but that's part of what it comes back to is, and we've dealt with this over the years in a number of industries, whether it's IPv6 or Wi-Fi 5 or anything, we've eventually had to resort to these kinds of, for lack of a better term, mind games or things like that. I mean, one of the reasons why IPv6 adoption has actually risen as much as it has in the last 3 or 4 years is because the U.S. federal government is mandating that you must be IPv6 compliant in order to sell systems to the federal government. Suddenly now everybody's enabling everything to run on IPv6. So do we find ourselves in a situation where we basically have to say we have to make these things mandatory? Like Netflix will only stream 4K video to your phone if it has a 6E radio in it. I actually made that recommendation for IPv6 and Netflix didn't take me up on it. So make that case and see if Netflix is ready to go with that.
It's not without precedence. We've done it before. I mean, moving from TKIP to AES with 802.11n or off of WEP, right? Punishing people, taking punitive measures so that people get off of old technology. That's not unheard of. So,
yeah, I think we're still struggling to get off B because of some deployments, hospitals, things like that. I think there's some basic stuff we can mandate before we start mandating some of the higher end stuff. But yeah, that's an interesting point. I think Wi-Fi has always been really great at putting it out there and then allowing the innovation. And I feel like if we, I'd like to see the 6 gigahertz go through a period of innovation before we start mandating things in it. Personally, from a personal viewpoint, I think there's a lot of potential there. And I also think the States has kind of led the world a little bit and has forced the issues in the 6 gigahertz. And I think that was very advantageous now. I think it pushes the ITUR to really start addressing some of these issues because they're always behind, but hopefully they can catch up a little bit faster, right? So it puts it on the global agenda. And I think that's incredibly valuable.
All right. Well, as you've heard, there's a lot of things that go into building technology. It's not just making the technology itself work, whether it's 4K QAM or BSS coloring or any one of the other things that people are trying to work on and make the technology better. There's regulatory concerns. There are standards bodies that you need to appease. There's even marketing and sales people that you have to deal with. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you deliver the standard that can be adopted. You deliver the technology that can be implemented. And if we waited for the perfect solution to come along every time, we would still be banging rocks together next to a giant monolith instead of driving autonomous vehicles while we surf the web on our pocket supercomputers. Everything needs to be iterated. Everything needs to be adjusted. And the next version may be the perfect one for what you need. That'll just about do it for this episode of the On-Premise IT podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. You can always find the latest episode on our website at gestaltit.com/podcast. You can also subscribe in your favorite podcatcher. Just look for the On-Premise IT podcast. And yes, we are using premise correctly in that case. We should be back again in another couple of weeks with another great episode. And in the meantime, please make sure you check out all of the coverage from Mobility Field Day, where all 3 of our guests will be delegates along with some other great influencers and experts in the community. Head to techfieldday.com and look for Mobility Field Day 9 for more details. We'll see you soon.